Hi, I'm Jim Richardson from Classic Car Garage. Today we're installing a complete air conditioning on this 58 Chevy Apache pickup truck. It's a real good kit. The only thing we weren't able to get from Old Air were these brackets for our compressor down here because we have a 6-cylinder engine. That's not too common, but these brackets are available from Patrick's in Arizona. Now we had to do some other things to this engine as well in the way of increased cooling capacity because of our air conditioning and because we're pumping about 200 horsepower out of this little engine when it was originally made to run at about 140. What we've had to do is go to a 4-core radiator that we got from US Radiator. It has more tubes and a lot more fins, so it cools a lot more effectively. And then so that actually works as well as it's supposed to, we went to a multi-bladed mechanical fan. The reason you want to go with a mechanical fan is they're about 25% more efficient than an electric fan. This one's off a 57 Chevy that had air conditioning, so it's got more blades. But if you haven't got one of those, you can go down to the local auto supply and pick one up, a multi-bladed fan, and install it pretty easily. Now, if you don't have the clearance, you can run an electric fan in here. Or, if you have the mechanical fan, you can run an auxiliary electric pusher fan up here to push air through the condenser that has to mount here, because that's going to put a little load on the cooling system. Now, along with our radiator, we've gone to a 16-pound pressure cap. For each pound of pressure that you increase the cooling system pressure over atmospheric, you raise the boiling point of the coolant by about 3 degrees. So that means with 16 pounds pressure, this coolant won't boil until it reaches around 260 degrees. And that's important because when coolant boils, it stops cooling. Now, you wouldn't want to put one of these on a stock radiator because chances are your stock radiator isn't set up for that kind of pressure. Another thing we've done, of course, is to put in a 160-degree thermostat. That's kind of a cool thermostat, but what it does is it lets the coolant start flowing at 160 degrees. That gives us a little more range to operate in, especially in traffic, on the freeway, stop-and-go driving. Finally, we wrapped our headers and our exhaust pipes to keep the heat inside them until it gets down and under the truck. That keeps the hot air from building up inside the engine bay, and it also lets cooler, denser air go into the carburetors to give us a cooler, denser mixture, which will increase horsepower. Let's get started. Now, these kits come with everything you need to install air conditioning in your Classic. Let me show you these things. Here's the evaporator. This goes in the cab under your dash, and that's what carries the heat away. And it carries it to this condenser that mounts in front of the radiator. And the condenser also turns the refrigerant from a vapor back to a liquid. From there, it's pumped through this filter, dryer. And what this does is pull moisture and contaminants out of the refrigerant. Over here, we have our controls, and those mount right where the old ashtray used to go. They're beautiful because you don't have to drill any holes. They look like they were made for that dashboard, and they're quite convenient. Now back here, we have some molded kick panels with the nozzles put right into it, so they're very clean and they look like they were always there. And then we even have a glove compartment box that fits in front of this evaporator that still gives you a glove compartment. And there's a fan shroud up there, and that's really intended for a V8. It won't work on our little 6. We're going to have to make one up. But those are very nice because they funnel the air through the fan and they stop the turbulence at the tips of the blades. And down below that is some insulating padding that'll help keep your car cool too. And over here we have our thermostat. Here are the cables. What do you say we get to work? Now the first thing we have to do is remove this old heater because it's just going to be in the way, and the new system has a heater built in. Here we go. We're going to use this template that came with our kit to mark where we need to drill a 3-inch hole in the firewall to accommodate the tubes from the evaporator. used a 3-inch hole saw to cut the hole, and now I'm going to take a file and just clean up the edges here. And we're just going to mount this adapter plate on the back of the evaporator that goes inside the cab. And this allows us to bolt this evaporator to the battery box bolts that go through. We'll just snug these little screws up so they hold the plate in place, but we don't need to really tighten them. If you tighten them too much, they'll just pull right out of this fiberglass box here. That's good. Now, down here is a nipple that lets condensation run out, water that condenses inside this evaporator. We'll put this tube on there so we can feed it out through the firewall and have the condensation run out under the truck rather than under your carpeting. Okay, next I want to explain about this thermostat. This keeps the system from freezing up. It's adjustable from inside the cab, and it's on this louvered plate that fits on the front of this evaporator coil. Now this tube just comes around, uncoils, and then feeds down through this hole right here. It then goes down and goes in where this pin is. It says here, insert capillary tube through this hole approximately 2 inches into fin area of coil and angle downward, then tear away label. So let's do that. We want to be very careful not to kink this tube though. Okay, kind of got it straightened out a little bit. Now just bring it on down through here and take our pin loose and feed this in at a 45-degree angle. Now the reason for the 45-degree angle is there's another set of tubes back there, and if you get this wrong you won't be able to push the sensor in. Okay, that's about right, and then we can just bring this up and snap this cover on and then bend this back out of the way. Okay, now I'm just going to feed this tube through the hole here. It was already in our firewall, right in the right spot, and then put those nipples out through there and slip this up on top of the battery box bolts. Come in here with a couple of nuts and lock washers, tighten this into place. It's really quite a neat unit. It fits in there beautifully, about where the old heater used to go. Looks pretty good in there. That'll take care of our evaporator. Then we'll feed our control console in. This tab fits up in here, and these welded on bolts go through these little notches down here, and that holds this in place. Feed our wiring through, being careful not to mess it up. And slip the tab up in, push it into place, and put on the nuts. It looks like it belongs there, like it's always been there. Now this is a relay, and it's on there because this old truck never had air conditioning, and the ignition switch probably couldn't handle the amperage if it were wired directly. So we have our relay, and this orange wire goes over to the accessory terminal on the ignition switch and provides a switch in here that relays the current to the air conditioner. This is our blower motor hookup, and the rest of the wiring from here on out is essentially a plug-and-play situation. It's really quite simple. It's almost impossible to mess it up. This hulk right here is an original compressor out of a 57 Chevy. It's quite large and heavy, and it's pretty inefficient. Now over here, the one we're going to install is a little Sandon compressor, smaller, lighter, and much more efficient. It also takes the new R134A refrigerant, which is much more environmentally friendly. These old compressors required R12. Now, of course, if you're doing a museum quality restoration, you might want to install this kind of system. But if you want comfort, this is the way to go. Over here, I have the original nozzle out of a 57 Chevy. There was one of these on each side of the dash. You could install these and run your ducting to them, so you would have a very authentic look inside your car, but still have the modern air conditioning. Let's put that compressor on. Old Air carries brackets for a number of different engines, and brackets are also available from other sources. We got these from Patrick's in Arizona that allow us to mount our compressor down here low. Other brackets are designed to mount the compressor in various ways depending on your hood clearance. The compressor just slips in here like this. Push it down, and we'll install our bolts. Once you have your compressor and alternator bolted into place loosely, tension your belts so that they go about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch either direction when you press them. If you make them tighter than that, they'll break on you or they'll ruin the bearings in your alternator or your compressor. Now, any good mechanic will lay out all his components and the tools he's going to need so he can see what he has to do and he can keep things organized. Now, this is our condenser. It turns the refrigerant from a vapor back to a liquid. This is our dryer receiver filter, and it takes any moisture or contaminants out of the system before it gets into here. Now, here are our brackets that hold the condenser in place, and these are some reinforcing brackets that mount up in the radiator. Over here are the instructions that come with our Old Air kit, and they're actually quite clear. The first thing I'm going to do is take these short bolts holding the radiator to its cradle out and replace them with longer bolts. And I'm going to do that one at a time so I won't have the radiator move around on me. I'm just putting these little tabs on that hold our condenser out away from the radiator. Now, we had to do a little fiddling to get these to work right. I think it's because our radiator wasn't a strictly standard setup. We had to drill a couple of extra holes, but it was no big deal. We turned this tab over and drilled a hole down here to get it to work. But that's about the only thing in this kit so far that we've had to fiddle with. Now, we have to remove this X-shaped cross brace up here because it interferes with where the condenser has to go. We ground off the heads of the rivets, and then we just pop this thing away. In place of that, there are longer bolts and these reinforcing bars that also support the condenser, and they just slip into place. It's a different setup on the other side over here. It goes in that. Let's see here. There we go. And this one goes up in here. Okay, now we're ready to put our condenser in. We've attached this aluminum tube that goes to the receiver dryer filter right here. It comes out of the bottom of the condenser where the stuff is liquefied. And we've added our tabs, and we're just going to put this in position now. As I said before, we have a little 6-cylinder engine, so we've had to mount this further forward than you would on a V8. And had to adapt our brackets just a little bit, but nothing more than drilling a couple of holes, really. And over on these last two bolts coming through, we'll add our receiver dryer filter here. Again, we've adapted it just a little bit for our application. Something you probably won't have to do unless you're going to be mounting this on a 6 like we're doing, 6-cylinder setup. Our installation here is somewhat unique in that we have a 6-cylinder engine in here. It's a little bit longer. It comes further forward in the engine compartment. These brackets that we installed here, these reinforcing brackets, if you had a V8, would normally go on the other side and take the radiator back an inch, and then the condenser would fit in front of that. We checked to make sure we had clearance though, and we were able to mount the radiator in its old position and then mount the condenser in front of it right here using these braces and brackets. And we have pretty much the same installation, it's just a little bit further forward, but it will clear the grill and the fender pans. We've checked all that out. And up here we have our filter and dryer, and that too will clear. We've checked it out and we put our grill up here just to see. This is the nozzle. This sprays the liquefied refrigerant into the evaporator, where it again picks up heat and turns to a vapor and then comes out through the other tube back to the compressor. It also has a temperature sensor here that lets the nozzle or expansion valve open and close its orifice slightly, and that attaches to the upper tube. Let me show you how this is done. Okay, we're going to lubricate this O-ring with some of the lubricant that goes inside the compressor and the refrigerant. And then just slip it in here on this hex fitting. Push it in with a screwdriver gently. You don't want to damage these O-rings. They're what seals the system. Okay, now we'll take our sensor, nozzle, put it on here, tighten this up. You'll notice the little bits of masking tape up above here. They tell me which way all the system goes, which way the refrigerant goes. I did that just to keep myself from getting confused. I'm using a big wrench, but you don't have to tighten these things to a smoking stub. They're just brass fittings, so just gently snug them up so that that O-ring does its job, but not so it's crushed, ruined. Okay, we'll take our sensor, which is just a copper tubing, bring it around here, and there's a steel clip that snaps onto the pipe here and holds that in place. There we go. Finally, we're going to take this tape and insulate the entire thing with the tape. We're going to have to cut it and tear it here and there because of the closeness of these pipes, but it's okay. You don't want to insulate, you want to insulate one pipe from the other. Don't wrap both of them, just wrap the upper one. That's all you need to do. It's kind of a tarry substance. But, I'll wrap some back in behind here too, just to make sure. This molds into place almost like putty. You can use a screwdriver to press it on. Put just a little more on there. Might as well use it up. That isolates the upper tube from the lower tube, so there won't be a change in temperature. One won't affect the other. I'll just push that through with the screwdriver. Okay, takes care of our nozzle. Good enough. Okay, now we're going to set up our hose. We've cut it to length. We're going to set up our vapor line out the top here where the hot gases come back out. Make sure the hose is all the way down on to the line there. Now we'll just take this O-ring, lubricate it again with some of the lubricant for the refrigerant, and this helps seal. If it's in there dry, then of course it'll have to leak until it seals, and you don't want that. Okay, put that right in here. There we go. Make sure it's seated. And then we'll just bring our hose over and tighten it into place. Let's see our O-ring. Okay, that's good. Wrench. This happens to be the only wrench I have that's big enough to do this. It's looks like a 1-inch fitting. But we're bringing it around so it clears the heater hoses. These are the heater hoses over here. Once again, you want to just snug this up. You don't need to tighten an O-ring down real tight or it'll just deform it and pinch it and cause a leak. The flare fittings are a different story. You'll have some flare fittings too. Now those do have to be tight. They have to be quite tight, but not an O-ring fitting like this. Okay. Nice and snug. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to hook this vapor hose up to the low pressure side of the compressor here. Once again, we'll use a lubricated O-ring and slip our hose into place here, tighten it up. We had to get a little creative with our hose routing because of the mounting of the compressor on the driver's side. Normally on a V8 it would be on the passenger side. But this works out just fine, and we got our hoses up out of the way of anything that might cut them or burn them. We'll just snug this up once again. You don't need to really clamp down on an O-ring to make it seal. There we go. That's good. Okay, now anytime you need to run a hose through a bulkhead like this, you're going to need to drill a large hole and then use a grommet so the hose won't chafe while the car is in service. We'll just push our grommet in here and we can connect up our high pressure line going back to the nozzle. There we go. Okay. Oh, didn't quite make it. There we go. Got it. Okay, now push this on back to here. Take our cap loose. Put on a lubricated O-ring again. And you can't lubricate these with anything but the kind of lubricant that goes in the compressor. Don't try to just use oil or something. It needs to be the type of lubricant that is used with the refrigerant. Here. Little guy. There we go. Pull this back through. Be careful not to get these on cross-threaded. It would be real easy to do. You would ruin the fitting and the hose. Of course, the hoses are replaceable, but they're fairly soft metal, aluminum, the pipe, and so you just take it easy and snug it up when you're finished. Okay. This is our high-pressure liquid hose. This is the highest pressure hose in the system, so it's the one you want to be the shortest, so you'll have fewest problems. I'm tightening it onto the nozzle here that sprays the liquid into the evaporator, and just needs to be snugged up nicely. Okay, that's good. Now, one thing else you might want to think about is how your battery box is going to fit. Ours will just clear if we take about a 1/16 of an inch off the tops here. Perhaps notch it for this railing up here. But with some vehicles, if this tubing is mounted up a little higher or needs to be mounted up a little higher, you may have to relocate your battery, but I think we're going to be all right. Okay. Next, we're going to install this heater control valve. As you can see, it's just a simple gate valve controlled by this lever and an actuating cable that goes into the control console inside. We'll just use this short piece of hose to attach it to the bottom tube here, so we'll have something to pull against. If you have it way out on a long piece of hose, it might just flop around. I'll just go ahead and slip this on. Okay, I'm just slipping the hot water hose on here from the thermostat housing on a 6-cylinder. On a V8, this is the thermostat housing. On a V8, it would come from the intake manifold. Finally, we want to install this gate valve right here. It's manually tripped, and the reason you want to have that is so you can shut off all the hot water to your heater during the summer, and also so you can shut off the hot water if your heater core springs a leak. We'll just cut the hose and slip it in and put some hose clamps on there. Okay, that's our heater control valve. The system seems kind of primitive, but it works very well. And this is the way most cars are set up. And they were all set up this way in the old days. I'm going to leave my gate valve in the off position for right now. That's on, that's off, until I get a chance to test the system. This is the last hose for our heater core, and it is the return coming down to the water pump. We'll just push that on. You want to push it all the way down to the ferrule on there. Now we're tightening the clamp into place. And that's it for the heater. We hook this up and then we hook it to the other side, and it's the return from the heater core. Okay, that's nice and tight. Come over here. Another hose clamp on. And slip it onto the upper tube here for the heater. I've put a little ordinary grease on there to help get the hose on. You can't do that with refrigeration tubes, but you can with heater tubes. It won't hurt anything. Okay, there are 2 cables that come with our kit. One operates the defroster inside under the dash. The other one comes out here and operates the heater by turning the hot water off and back on with this lever. It's really quite ingenious. Very simple, dependable kind of setup. Okay, that's about it. Okay, now we're going to just slip the O-ring on here. We've lubricated it with a little of this refrigerant lubrication. You don't want to use anything else but that. And then we'll take the cap loose As we said before, you don't want to remove these until you're ready to install the hose because you don't want contamination in there. We'll just slip it down in. Start our nut here. Once again, you don't want to tighten these too tight because you'll just deform the O-ring. We'll just cinch it up here. That'll do it. This is our high pressure hose that takes the vaporized refrigerant over to the condenser over here where it's turned back into a liquid. Again, because we have a 6-cylinder engine, our compressor is over on the far side over here, and so we had to bring our high pressure vapor line around this way in front. We've clamped it here and here. Now all we're going to do is it ties in right here at the top of the condenser, and we'll get our length right there. Then we'll cut our hose with a knife. Now you don't want to cut your hose with a hacksaw, even though these hoses are quite stiff and hard to cut. The reason being that you'll get little granules down in the system that can contaminate it and cause problems. So just be patient and go ahead and cut the hose. Now let's go over our hoses one more time just to make sure you understand how all this plumbing works. This is the hot vapor coming out of the evaporator carrying the heat away from the cab. And it goes through this big thick hose over to the suction side of the compressor. After that, it's pumped up and put through this hose up here and into this condenser where it goes through this serpentine set of tubes and through these fins and cools itself back down to a liquid. Then it comes up this tube and through here over to our dryer and filter, which takes moisture and contaminants out of the refrigerant. Finally, in liquid form, it comes back through here and up here and goes into our spray nozzle where it's sprayed back into the evaporator to carry away more heat. Now these two hoses here are just heater hoses. This is the hot water line going from the thermostat, and this is a valve for summer use. You can shut off all the hot water to the system if you like. This is the control that turns your heater on. And this tube here is just a return for the water being pumped through the heater, and it goes back over here to the water pump. Take it up a little tighter. There we go. We'll plug our wire harness on and see here. There we go. We're in business. Now this wire goes back to the thermostat on top of the evaporator. It has a probe that goes down into the cooling coils. This other wire goes over to your compressor. This switch shuts the compressor off if the pressure builds too high in the system. It's really kind of a safety device. Now you would want to integrate these wires into your wire harness so they were aesthetically pleasing and so that they didn't chafe anywhere. Okay, we're just going to take our louvered vent grill here off, and the old kick panel. Lift that out. You'd want to probably shoot some Corollas or some kind of rust inhibitor in here. Now, these grills, these are our new kick panels. They're made of plastic and they're black when they come from the old air people. You can either paint the louvered grille to match black to match the panel, or you can paint the panel the color of your truck, whichever you choose. We'll just slip this up in here. That fits over the cable that operates the system. As you can see, this little cable end here is attached to a lever, and it actuates these 4 ducts for the air conditioning. When you push this lever down, it closes the air conditioning ducts and opens the defroster ducts. You can see how that works. Now this other lever over here works the heater, and it drives a valve on the outside that cuts off the water to the heater. You can see how that works. Now the next thing we want to do is mount the center vents right up under here, the controls for the air. And the easiest way to do that is just to take our stereo out. You just have to loosen these 2 hex nuts and it comes right out. Now we're going to just hook up our ducting in here, push it on. This goes over to the nozzles inside the cab and takes the cool air to the passengers. This one is the longest one, and it goes over to the far kick panel there for the driver. You want to hook up the longest one first just to make sure you have enough tubing. These 2 go to this center set of nozzles, and there's one on the end down here you can't see, and that goes to this nozzle in this kick panel. And that's just about it for our system. Okay, now we're just going to slip our special glove box in. It's a little shallower than the original to allow for that evaporator, but there's still plenty of room in it, and we'll just screw that into place. That's just about everything we have to do. There we go. This is how these sleeves look before they're crimped on. When you have the system charged, you want to have these crimped by the air conditioning shop onto the hose to prevent leaks, because the gas is under tremendous pressure in here. Here's how the little sleeves look after they're crimped onto the hoses, and here is where the refrigerant goes in when they charge the system. It's a good idea to keep the interior of your car as cool as possible. Now in our old truck here, we used a foam expanding insulation that comes out of an aerosol can. It's waterproof. It makes the car much quieter, and it also insulates against heat buildup. Now, in addition to that, we've added some undercoating down below to deaden sound and act as an insulator. And finally, we're going to use tinted windows to further keep the car cool. Well, that's about it. These systems are really pretty simple. You can install one in a day with a few hand tools. The kit comes with everything you need, and it's basically a bolt-on setup. Now all we have to do is get those crimp-on clamps put on our hoses so they'll stay in place, and we'll do that down at the air conditioning shop, and then we'll have the system charged. And this summer, everybody else is going to be running hot, but we're going to be keeping our cool.